Now, if you thought the production values were a bit shoddy on the last one, you're in for a ride on this one. Hello again everyone, my name's Jo and I'm going to show you in this video how to decorate your Halloween cupcakes. Now I need to start off by apologising. My phone decided to overheat and corrupt a lot of the footage I had for this, resulting in me needing to put the phone in the freezer so I could continue to use it to make this video. Needs must, we adapt, we overcome, we move on, which is probably everyone's mantra for 2020. So we'll need to prepare a couple of things here. So I'm going to give you a tip for a small batch pure white buttercream. Now I want you all to remember, when I say tip, I mean something that is actually useful, as opposed to a hack, which is someone who generally creates content for 5-minute crafts. For the small batch pure white buttercream, you're going to need 60 grams of Trex. Now you can use butter or margarine if you would like, it just means that your icing isn't going to be purely white. To that Trex, you're going to need to add 120 grams of sieved icing sugar and 1 teaspoon to 1 tablespoon of milk or cream if you are feeling fancy. Also add a quarter of a teaspoon of flavouring at this time if you choose to do so. I did not, because the salted caramel that I used in these cakes is quite strong, so the buttercream did not need flavouring. If you're not using salted butter, use a pinch of salt to your liking. You don't even have to put it in if you don't want to. And if you are colouring your icing, use gel, powder or food colouring for this. So the method for the buttercream couldn't be easier. What you want to do is beat the butter or the Trex, whatever you're using, with an electric hand mixer. You can use a wooden spoon for this. It will take longer and give your arm a slight workout on the process. Now to the butter or the Trex, you will then need to gently fold in your icing sugar. If you are not gentle when folding in your icing sugar, you will end up with an icing sugar explosion. It will cover everything in a fine film of icing sugar and it will be awful to clean. Take my word for it, go slowly when you're doing this at the beginning. You also want to add your food colouring at this stage if you're using it. Now if the mixture is too stiff, here is where you want to add the milk. Do it half a teaspoon at a time until the desired consistency is reached. Now if you want to store your buttercream until it's ready to use, you can either put it in a piping bag and leave it in there, or you can pop it in a tub and just pop it in the fridge, or leave it at room temperature if you're going to use it soon. If you have put your buttercream in the fridge, take it out a little while before using it, because it will need to be at room temperature so you can spread it on your cakes. Now for the small batch royal icing, you will need the following ingredients. You will need icing sugar, you'll need a free-range egg white, you'll need lemon juice and glycerin. If you're colouring your royal icing, you will also need gel or powder food colouring. This is an optional step. Now the glycerin in royal icing is optional. It is there just to give a slightly softer set to the final product that you're putting it on. So if you don't like crunching through really hard icing, then this is where your glycerin is going to come in. Now combining these ingredients again couldn't be easier, so you'll need to separate the egg white from the yolk and set the yolk aside. I usually use the yolk for breakfast the next day to make some richer scrambled eggs. Now once you have separated the egg white from the yolk, you'll need to pop that in a clean mixing bowl and whisk that slightly until it goes bubbly. Now once that goes bubbly, you will need to pop in your other ingredients into the bowl and, starting gently, just mix that all together until it's fully combined. Now if you find that the consistency again is not to your liking here, you can add just a little bit more lemon juice until the desired consistency is reached. Now to store this, you will need to put some cling film directly on top of the icing by gently pushing that cling film onto the icing so it's totally covered. This will prevent it from setting until it's ready to be used. Again, that can be stored in a fridge, or you can leave it on the side if you're going to use it right away. Now for those that don't know, filling a piping bag is relatively easy. What you want to do is pop your piping tip into the bag before you snip the tip off, because you want to know how far down you need to make that cut. Now as you can see, you don't need to actually cut the piping bag very far from the edge of the tip, just a little bit down, just enough so the edge of the tip is protruding from the bag. Now for those that don't know how to fill in a piping bag, I'm actually going to show you how to do that here. From this image you can see that I'm actually just drawing on some black lines into my piping tip. Now one of the cakes that I made that I don't have the footage for does have stripes on it, and this is how you get the stripes. Little disclaimer here, if you need stripes for the entire batch of your icing, then you'll actually need to paint the stripes all the way up your piping bag before you cap off the tip, as I've done here. Moving swiftly on, so grab yourself a glass, one that will fit the piping bag in and over. You'll see what I mean in a moment. What you're going to do is just pop the piping bag inside of that glass and fold it over the edge of the glass so it remains open without you having to hold it. Now when you have done that, you are going to scrape your buttercream into the piping bag and make sure not to overfill it. I am terrible for overfilling my piping bags and it results in a mess because it will all squeeze out at the top. You do not want to fill your piping bag more than half full. Now as you can see in the images, I have actually clipped the ends of my piping bags as well. Now you can either just twist the bag, you can use an elastic band, you can use a food tie, whatever you have to hand. I find these clips that I got from IKEA yonks ago, I don't know even if they still sell them. I find these incredibly useful for capping my piping bags, especially when I'm using multiple bags for one project. You can also see here that I have put the surplus royal icing in a pot as I described with the cling film on top. So now I'm going to show you how to make the tombstones. Now you can make these biscuits yourself. I didn't want to, so I went and bought some from the shop. So as you can see, I'm using bourbon biscuits and malted milks. Use a biscuit of your preference. I thought these ones would lend themselves quite nicely because of their shape. Now as you can see, I have already piped the outer edge with the royal icing. You want to leave that to harden up just a little bit, say 15 minutes or so, before you flood fill the icing. Now once you have left that to set, you are going to flood fill these. Now this is actually a relatively easy process, it's not scary at all. If this is your first time, I suggest you give it a go. It's a really easy and quick way to get quite an effective decoration. As you can see, I'm simply filling in the cap with the icing here. Now whilst that's still wet, I'm taking my cake tester and I'm just circling around in there to fill out any gaps, get rid of any air bubbles and make sure that that icing's nice and smooth. I'm then switching to my black icing and I'm piping a little decoration in here. Now believe me when I tell you, if I can do this, anyone can do this. Once you finish piping, add your sprinkles as you see fit and then leave those to the side for a few hours to dry fully before using. Now if you are not keen on using raw eggs, you can just use water and icing sugar for this. However, that will not set, so that will remain wet and you won't be able to push that down into your cake like you'll see later on. And whilst waiting for my tombstones to dry, I decided to make a witch's hat cake. This looks really effective and is a lot simpler than you'd imagine. We're going to start at quite an important step before you even think about icing this cake, is to make yourself a dusting bag. Now use a clean dishcloth and as you can see I've put some icing sugar, a small amount, in the middle of that dishcloth and carefully gathered it up and tied it with an elastic band, and that is your dusting bag that you'll use to powder your surface for rolling out your icing. Now I used some foam mushrooms, I rolled out some black icing and put that on top of the mushroom and just shaped it with my hands. Now it is actually worth using icing that is already dyed black for this. Trying to get a black fondant icing yourself from a white icing is an utter nightmare. Save yourself the aggravation, just buy yourself icing that's been pre-coloured for this. Now as you can see, I've rolled out an additional piece of icing here to put the foam mushroom on top and seal it in. This will finish your witch's hat. And to decorate the witch's hat, I've just piped around a band and popped a sprinkle on there to look like a belt buckle. And that's your witch's hat finished. Now for the cake itself, you will need to grab some buttercream and pipe that onto the cake. You don't need to be particularly neat here because you are going to cover it in sprinkles. Now put some sprinkles in a bowl and press the cake gently into the sprinkles until it is fully covered. Top the cake with the witch's hat from before and you have your finished cake. So now that your tombstones are dry and set, we are going to make these gravestone cakes. So we're going to start by popping some bourbon biscuits in the microwave for 10 seconds so they are easy to separate. And we're going to separate the bourbon cream from the biscuit. Don't worry, everything will get used. Now I am supremely extra and I do have a mini pestle and mortar. If you don't have this to crush your biscuits, you can actually use a rolling pin or any method you'd like. Now with the cream, I popped that into the microwave for 10 seconds to make that soft. Used some of the white buttercream and mixed that all in so you've got a bourbon icing. I then piped a little bit of white icing into the middle just for a bit of height. As you'll find out in a moment, I didn't put enough there. And then with a spoon I just covered the rest of the cake with the bourbon icing and rolled it in the dirt like we did with the sprinkles for the witch's hat. Looking at it and the size of the biscuits, I realised quite quickly that I did not have enough icing on there, so I had to make do and put some more on top. A bit of a task as it didn't want to stick to the bourbon dirt that we used, but we persevered and they turned out pretty good, I think. I then sprinkled more of the dirt on top to cover the extra icing, and that finished this cake. Now this guy turned out to be one of my favourites. It's one that I had to doctor because I didn't like how it looked originally, as you'll see. So to do this one, we're actually going to make up some edible blood. It's not near as disgusting as it sounds. We are using some seedless raspberry jam and some lemon juice, and you simply mix that together until you get the consistency that you want. Now through the magic of editing, we are now going back through time to when I started this cake, and you're going to cut off the peak. You're then going to put icing on top. You're then going to ice the cake and put on some teeth. Now add the peak of the cake and add more icing to the top. This is what the top set of teeth are going to rest on. Put some fake blood on here just for effect. Again, you don't have to do this at this stage. I thought it looked cool. Pop your teeth back on top, just a little bit more fake blood, and then put some piping all around to cover up the edges. Now this is where I discovered that actually I didn't like the way it looked, so I shoved a gummy worm inside. And that finishes this cake. Now this one is very easy to do. This is our random chaos cake, and you are simply going to grab your piping bags, just pipe on it randomly until the cake is covered, and then pop your gummies on top. So I got these ones from Marks and Spencer. They actually taste pretty good and they're gelatin free. After I iced the cake, I just popped them on top and then sprinkled some of the fake blood on. Now these little ghostly fellows are my absolute favourites and are a lot easier than they seem. You're going to start off by rolling out some of your icing. Now another tip for you is to actually buy yourself some premium grade fondant. You can use the fondant that you get in your supermarket, but it's not very workable and you're going to have a bit of a tough time. So I do use Renshaw icing here. It's the one I'd recommend, but you do you, and you get the icing that you prefer to use. So the largest cookie cutter that I have to hand wasn't actually big enough for this cake. Never fear, there are ways and means of adapting to this. You simply need to roll the icing a little bit thicker than what you want it to be, cut the shape out, and then roll over it again, and this will expand the icing to your desired length. Now once you've done that, set your icing aside, grab your cake and pipe on some buttercream. Pop a marshmallow on top, grab your icing and put that on top of the marshmallow. You then want to gently pleat this until you are happy with the shape. Grab your royal icing and just paint on 3 dots, 2 for the eyes and a slightly bigger one for the mouth, and you are done. Now this eyeball cake is the final cake. We are nearly at the end. All you need to do is just grab a cake, and again you'll see that's mounded up for height, so you don't need to use as much icing on this. Pipe some icing around, colour it in whatever colour you feel happy with, or don't colour it at all. The choice is entirely up to you. Now you want to grab the eyes and just pop them at random intervals all over the cake. Now, if you are anything like me, you will have some food colouring on your hands. Now, food colouring can be a nightmare to get off. What I suggest you do is head over to the pound shops, get yourself a bar of Vanish stain removal soap and wash your hands with this in cold water. If you use hot water, it's going to set the stain. If you use cold water, this won't be as much of an issue. And as you can see, my hands are actually relatively clean, but after using the soap, they are absolutely spotless. If you were wondering how I got the sprinkles back into the tub, I used a plastic funnel. These are a godsend in a kitchen. If you don't have one, I recommend you get one. But that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and whatever you're doing, you have yourself a fantastic time. Until next time.